The backyard looked like something out of a magazine. String lights draped like liquid gold, the low hum of laughter, the rich, smoky smell of barbecue drifting through the warm Idaho air. From the outside, it was the perfect family gathering, the annual celebration of summer and perceived harmony. But standing there with a paper plate heavy in my hand, I could feel it, the thin, almost invisible layer of tension that no one in the Peterson family ever dared to name. My mother, Linda, floated from one guest to another, her smile polished and expertly fixed, the hostess uniform she wore from the moment someone important walked through the gate. My sister, Amanda, sat in the center of the crowd, radiant in a new floral dress that cost more than my last Seattle rent payment. Her son, Liam, perched proudly beside her, soaking up the unconditional admiration that had, quite frankly, never once been directed my way. "Tell us about the Florida trip, Amanda," someone called out from the lawn chair cluster. Amanda laughed, flipping her curtain of glossy hair. "Oh, it was amazing. Mom insisted we stay an extra week just because the weather was so perfect." Mom nodded from across the yard, her hand resting lightly on a guest's shoulder, feigning humility. "Well, they work hard. They deserve that little break. Someone has to appreciate the finer things." I smiled the way people do when they know they're supposed to, the bright, empty expression of a well-trained audience member. No one asked how Seattle was treating me. No one asked about the master's degree I just earned, the one that had taken 3 years and near starvation budgets and double shifts to achieve. On the main table, under the warm glow of a single lantern, sat the cake. It was white, painstakingly decorated with blue lettering that read, "Congrats, Daisy." It was pushed to the far corner, nestled beside a stack of slightly damp paper plates and half-empty cans of generic soda. Every time someone walked past, they bumped it slightly, a subtle, almost subconscious rejection, as if it didn't matter whether it stayed upright or not. Beautiful, earned, yet utterly ignored, forgotten in plain sight. A sudden breeze rolled through the yard, making the fairy lights sway like tiny captive stars. For a second, that old foolish hope sparked. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd surprise me. Then Liam, my 10-year-old nephew, bolted toward the table, his eyes glinting with that specific, untamed mischief that Mom always excused as boyish exuberance. His voice, loud and piercing, cut through the comfortable chatter. "Aunt Daisy, Mom says you only got your degree so you can brag about it." The laughter that followed wasn't warm. It was sharp, ugly, instantly bonding the rest of the family against me. Mom didn't even try to stop him. She just smiled wider. Amanda pretended to hide her smile behind a tilted glass of expensive Pinot Grigio. I thought about every time I'd been told to share, to sacrifice, to be the strong one, the one who didn't need help, the one who didn't complain about the utility bills or the second mortgage Mom took out. My throat tightened, the old reflex to swallow down the pain, to make myself smaller. When Liam's small, determined hand shoved the cake off the edge, the world seemed to compress into a single, agonizing frame. The porcelain plate shattering against the wooden deck, frosting, pristine white and blue, splattering across my expensive and only pair of clean black pumps. Everyone gasped, and then, horrifically, they laughed again. I froze, gripping the serrated knife I'd been using to serve slices, the metal cool against my sweaty palm. No one told him to apologize. Not a single voice, not even my father, sitting quietly on his phone by the grill, looked up with concern. The last thing I remember was my mother's voice, light and amused, utterly devoid of malice, yet somehow the cruelest sound I had ever heard. "Oh, come on, Daisy, don't be so sensitive. It's just sugar." I set the knife down, the sound barely audible over their chuckles. I untied the apron I'd tied on earlier, a symbol of my service to this event. And then I walked toward the door. Every footstep on the wooden deck sounded too loud, too decisive. Their laughter followed me, a musical, mocking score from a party I was never truly invited to. Outside, the Idaho night air was colder, the sky bruised with deep indigo. I got into my beat-up car and drove away without saying goodbye. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I just knew something vital inside me had finally snapped, a delicate structural beam giving way. And there was no going back after tonight. I drove for hours that night, the headlights cutting sharp cones through the empty Idaho highway. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles burned white. The laughter from the party kept replaying, the sound of plates clinking, the whisper of frosting hitting wood, my mother's gentle dismissing tone. "Don't be so sensitive." By the time I reached my small apartment in Seattle, the city was deep asleep, the rain just starting to streak down the windows in thin, mesmerizing trails. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my ruined shoes, and sank into the sudden, profound silence. It was the silence of a vacuum. My phone buzzed, a single text message from Mom. For a fleeting second, the old programming flared. Maybe, just maybe, it would be an apology, a realization. But when I opened it, the words sliced cleaner and deeper than any knife I'd ever held. "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever." A few seconds later, a tiny bright red heart icon popped up beside the message, Amanda's enthusiastic endorsement. I stared at the screen, my own reflection glowing faintly against the dark glass. My chest didn't tighten. I didn't cry. I just sat there, utterly numb, as if my body had finally stopped trying to prove it could still feel pain on their behalf. I opened my laptop, the blue light flickering across the dim room. The cursor blinked relentlessly on an old spreadsheet, my meticulous budget tracker. 2 rows stared back at me, the anchors of my entire adult life. One, $400 monthly. Amanda's SUV, $640 monthly. Both loans co-signed by me. Both payments automatically withdrawn from my primary account on the first of every month for the last 3 years. I'd signed those papers because Mom had looked at me with those wide, trusting eyes and whispered, "You're the responsible one, honey. Just help the family out until Amanda gets her footing. We'll take over soon." Back then, that felt like love. Now, staring at the figures in the cold light at 2 a.m., it looked like a financial leash. The rain outside grew louder, drops hitting the glass in uneven, relentless rhythms, like a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. I scrolled through years of archived messages, polite thank yous, guilt-laced reminders, frantic excuses, just until Amanda's business picks up. "Your dad's between jobs again. We'll handle the payments next month." Next month never came. The weight in my chest shifted. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was blinding, crystalline clarity. I opened a new message window and began typing slowly, each letter deliberate, each word a hammer blow closing a door. I didn't add emojis. I didn't add an explanation or a defense. I hit send. The phone chimed once, a single soft notification. Then, silence. I placed the phone face down on the counter. The rain softened outside. I poured myself a glass of water, watching the condensation slide down the side. For the first time, silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like absolute sovereign control. They had wanted me gone, fine, but this time they were the ones who would feel the absence first. Morning came, gray and cold, the kind of Seattle dawn that washes the world clean. I brewed coffee and stared at the steam rising from the mug, thinking of how easily things end, not with dramatic shouting, but with a single, calculated text message. I hadn't slept, but I felt strangely, terrifyingly wide awake. By 9 a.m., my phone had started vibrating with a violence that threatened to shake it off the desk. Mom, Dad, Amanda, unknown numbers from Boise, over 100 missed calls. The family group chat, now clearly a conflict chat, exploded with demands, threats, and weaponized guilt. "How dare you ruin our credit? You're heartless. You'll regret this. We raised you." Not one message contained the word sorry. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled on a gray, functional sweater, tied my hair back into a tight, no-nonsense knot, and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a beat before typing, "Green First Bank, Downtown Seattle Branch." I needed a paper trail for the next step. Mr. Diaz met me in a quiet consultation office with pale blue walls and a single thriving fern in the corner. The sound of his pen clicking as he signed the final release form was small, almost insignificant, but to me it felt seismic. My hands trembled as I signed where he directed. Each signature felt like cutting another invisible string that had bound me in place for decades. When the bank stamp thudded onto the final page, it felt like a lock snapping shut on a cage door. He looked at me kindly. "You did the right thing, Miss Wilson. Sometimes protecting yourself is the only way to teach others how to respect you." Outside, the wind still bit cold against my cheeks, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years, the empty space now filled with clear air. I stopped at a small cafe on the corner before heading to the office. When the barista handed me my cappuccino, she gave me a genuine, unforced smile. "Have a good day." I met her eyes and said something I hadn't been able to say and truly mean in years. "I will." That evening, as I cooked a simple, quiet pasta dish in my small, functional kitchen, my phone buzzed again. This time, the family group chat glowed on the screen, a beacon of desperation. "How dare you ruin our credit? You're heartless. You'll regret this." I typed one calm, centered line. I just stopped paying for people who laughed when my cake hit the floor. Then I pressed send and set the phone down, face up this time, but silenced. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of freedom. 3 days passed before the sharp, angry, relentless knock came. Each pound vibrated through the thin walls of my Seattle apartment. I froze mid-step, the pan of boiling pasta hissing forgotten behind me. My stomach twisted with a cold certainty even before I checked the video intercom. On the screen stood my mother and Amanda. 2 faces I knew by heart, now contorted with fury and panic. Mom's lips were pressed into a tight, bloodless line, her arms folded across her chest like a prosecuting attorney preparing a closing statement. Amanda's eyes were wide, bloodshot, her carefully constructed composure hanging loose around her neck like a discarded necklace. "Daisy!" Mom's voice cut through the door, high and trembling with forced control. "Open this door right now. We need to talk. What did you do with the bank?" I didn't move. I watched through the monitor as they shifted from foot to foot on the communal landing, glancing nervously at the other doors as neighbors peeked out, drawn by the sudden domestic drama. Amanda's voice rose, shrill, desperate. "You ruined everything. The bank froze our accounts. Mom's credit is gone. My car is about to be repossessed. Do you think this is funny?" Funny. The word stung. Not because of the accusation, but because that was precisely how they had treated me my entire life, as a source of perpetual, reliable amusement. The strong one who didn't get to have feelings or bank accounts. I took a slow, deep breath, steadied my voice, and calmly activated the voice recorder on my phone. Seattle Police Department, I whispered into the 911 app screen. 2 individuals are outside my apartment, refusing to leave after being asked. I'd like to report trespassing. Do you know them? The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Yes, I said quietly, eyes still fixed on the monitor where Amanda slammed her hand against my door. They're my family, but today they are just people violating my established boundaries. Outside, the pounding grew louder. Amanda's voice was a raw plea now. Daisy, you're destroying this family. You think cutting us off makes you strong? You're selfish, heartless. Mom's voice cracked, half rage, half pure panic. We're your parents. You don't treat family like enemies. 10 minutes later, the street below was painted with the flashing red and blue lights of the responding patrol cars. 2 officers appeared in the camera frame. 1 man, 1 woman, calm, professional, utterly unswayed by the history hanging in the air. They approached my mother first. I watched through the intercom as Mom rushed toward them, pointing furiously at my door. She's my daughter. She destroyed our finances. We just want to talk to her. Amanda's voice broke into dramatic sobs. She almost cost me my car. My fiancé is threatening to leave me because of her credit. She's heartless. The male officer raised a hand gently. Ma'am, this is private property. If she's asked you to leave, you need to leave now. She's my child, Mom shouted, regaining some indignation. I have rights as a mother. The officer shook his head, his voice level. You have rights as a mother, ma'am, but not the right to trespass on an adult's residence when they refuse entry. This conversation is over. The camera shook slightly as Amanda backed away, her face collapsing into frustrated defeat. For a brief, treacherous second, a tiny wave of familiar guilt brushed against me, light, fleeting, the old conditioning surfacing. But then I remembered the frosting splattered across the pavement, the sound of their collective laughter, the suffocating silence that followed my departure from Idaho. No, I thought firmly, not again. Through the intercom speaker, I spoke quietly, just enough for the microphone to capture my measured tone. If they act like intruders, then the line between family and boundary no longer exists for me. The officer looked up toward the camera monitor and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging my silent justification. He gestured toward the stairwell. Let's go, ladies. Mom turned back toward the door one last time, her eyes burning with a mixture of fury and deep betrayal. You'll regret this, Daisy. Blood doesn't disappear just because you say so. I didn't answer. The door stayed shut. They left under the dull, repetitive flash of police lights. Their footsteps echoed down the stairwell, heavy, defeated, fading into the city noise. When silence finally returned, it felt like oxygen flooding into a room that had been sealed shut for years. I slid down to the floor, my back against the cold wall, the phone still recording. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. I saved the audio file and named it Boundaries, April 17th, 2025. That night, I stood by the window, watching the city breathe beneath me. For once, I wasn't running toward something. I was simply standing still. The next morning, my inbox filled again, this time with messages I hadn't expected, delivered through a different, more public channel. A Facebook post from Mom, pinned to the top of her profile. Big letters, bold text. Sometimes the child you trust most betrays you the worst. Daisy stole from her parents and ruined our credit. Some people never learn gratitude. Below it were dozens of comments from old neighbors, distant relatives, even people whose names I barely recognized. So ungrateful. Poor Linda, after all she's done for that girl. I always said Daisy was the moody one. And then, the comment that truly tried to twist the knife. I heard she used her parents' money to buy that apartment in Seattle. I stared at the screen. The old me would have panicked, typing out long, defensive explanations, begging people to believe the truth, trying to salvage a reputation that had been built on sand for decades. But now, I just breathed. They were throwing fire, but I absolutely refused to burn. Instead, I opened a new email, short, measured, and professional. Clarification, personal matter. Hi team, if you see rumors circulating online regarding my personal finances, please ignore them. Some people fight boundaries with lies. I am fine, focused on my work, and deeply appreciate your professionalism and privacy regarding this situation. Daisy. Then I closed the laptop. The truth, I realized, doesn't need shouting. It only needs time and a solid foundation. 3 days later, a thick official envelope arrived at my office building, hand-delivered by a courier. The letterhead read, Green First Bank. Inside was a document bearing Mr. Diaz's signature and the bank seal. This letter confirms that Miss Daisy Wilson has been fully released from all liabilities concerning the joint mortgage and vehicle loan under the names of Linda and Amanda Wilson, effective immediately. All proprietary claims have been discharged. The embossed gold seal at the bottom shimmered under the office lights. My fingers brushed across the paper, tracing the curve of my signature. The moment, everything irrevocably changed. It wasn't revenge, it was administrative justice. That evening, the Facebook post disappeared. Maybe Mom's sister called her. Maybe the bank's verification department had called her back to confirm the liability transfer. I didn't care. The damage didn't matter anymore because I'd stopped living for their approval. Still, my phone buzzed again. A text from a number I hadn't saved in months. It was Amanda. "You think you've won? You'll pay for this, Daisy." I smiled faintly. Winning wasn't the point. Freedom was. I stood by the window of my apartment, the vast Seattle skyline stretching out like a map of second chances. The air smelled like coffee and rain, sharp and clean, full of possibility. For the first time, I felt unchained. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the sound of power finally speaking for itself. Weeks passed, and the noise finally died down. No more late-night calls exploding with panic. No more veiled threats whispered through distant relatives. The silence that had once terrified me, the silence of my own unacknowledged needs, now felt like absolute peace. I focused on my work at Green Post Tech, diving deep into the new codebase until I finished a major project that resulted in a quiet but significant promotion. Lydia, our CEO, had said it during a review meeting, her gaze direct and appreciative. "Daisy, you lead with steadiness. When you commit to something, people trust that it will be handled completely and without drama." It was the first time anyone had said those words to me without the expectation of repayment. At home, life found a genuine rhythm. Early morning yoga classes, simmering soups on slow evenings, and laughter shared with friends who actually saw me, not just what I could offer them. Elena brought over wildflowers. One Saturday, Marcus, my neighbor, teased me about the spiky cactus on my windowsill, saying, "It looks like me, Daisy, calm on the outside, but don't touch without permission." Then, one quiet morning, I received an email from Mr. Diaz, the bank manager. Attached was a photograph of my original liability release document, now professionally framed and hanging in the bank's compliance office. "We use it as a primary example of successful boundary protection cases," his message read. "Well done, Daisy." I sipped my coffee by the window, the sun finally breaking through the Seattle haze. For once, I wasn't someone's financial safety net or silent backbone. I was just Daisy, whole, free, and finally belonging only to myself. A year after the cake incident, my phone buzzed with a single new text message from an unsaved number, Amanda's new line perhaps. "I'm sorry for everything, no excuses, just trying to be better." 6 quiet words. I stared at the screen for a long moment, thinking of the Idaho backyard, the shattered porcelain, the laughter that sounded like knives. Then, I gently set the phone down on the counter without replying. Forgiveness, I realized with a profound sense of calm, doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes, it's simply closing it gently from your side and walking away in perfect, unburdened peace. Outside, Lake Union shimmered under the evening light, vast and endless. I breathed in the cool, clean Seattle air and whispered to the reflection in the glass, "Welcome home, Daisy."